Okay.
I'm Bill Shannon. I'm president of the Chatham Railroad Museum Association. We're the managers of the Chatham Railroad Museum, of which we're standing in. The building is actually owned by the village of Chatham, and we manage the museum in this 118-year-old building. Currently standing in what was known as the freight room, and by freight it meant if you had like a package or some big box you wanted to ship to your grandmother in another state, you bring it here, and they'd load it on the train and ship it away. Of course, that was in years past. Or if you'd order a new stove from Sears catalog, it would be delivered here and you'd come get it. But anyway, this room is full of different mementos, artifacts, pictures, etc. I'll start over here. Like this wall is representations of the Illinois Terminal Railroad, which came through Chatham. It's no longer here. A lot of people call it the Interurban. It ran frequent service between St. Louis and Springfield on up to Peoria. Different photographs of Illinois Terminal Railroad equipment. Up here is actually a sign from the Illinois Terminal Depot in Elkhart, Illinois, which is up on I-55 north of Springfield. Pictures, there's a train coming through past the station there. Another shot. Here's the station that was in Chatham years ago. It was just immediately north across the street from where we're at the present time. One of their streamlined cars coming across the street right immediately north of us. Of course, those buildings are gone and everything, that's all gone now, but back in the 50s, that was a frequent experience of people seeing that come through Chatham. Interesting thing I believe here is a map of Chatham about right after World War I, which shows it wasn't a very big town then compared to today. And then in this display case, everything in here is related to that Illinois Terminal Railroad. One of the items that's normally in the case, I'll hold it up so you can see it. It's on glass, so I've got to be careful with it. But anyway, advertising the OWL from Illinois Traction System, which was a predecessor of Illinois Terminal. It was a passenger train. They called it the OWL because it offered nighttime service to St. Louis. And if you were in Peoria, you could board the train, and they had a sleeping car, and you could bed down for the night. And when it got to Springfield, there was another sleeping car they had parked, and the people were already in it. They'd hook onto that car, and then everybody be in St. Louis in the morning. So it's kind of an interesting thing that they did back then. And of course, when I say interurban, it was all electrically powered up until in the mid-50s they switched to diesels. But you can see, for instance, in this picture here, the overhead wires. And the cars actually picked up the electricity from the overhead wires, and that powered the trains. So they used to advertise no smoke, no cinders, quiet, etc., which is kind of interesting. They also had sleeping car service. There's a blow up of an advertisement for it, which interurban railroads, they were common in the early part of the 20th century, but not all of them had sleeping cars. That was what I was just mentioning about getting on the car, bedding down for night, and waking up in St. Louis. And this display case here is kind of hard to see on film because it's not brightly lit, but there's many, many artifacts from the Illinois Terminal Railroad in there. Some of the more interesting ones are some glasses that we use in dining car service, some photographs. There's I don't know if it can be seen very well at all, there's a model train of an Illinois Terminal freight train back there, which hard to take pictures through glass. It's just a variety of items. I can spend a lot of time explaining it, but I won't at this time. Sitting on top, you might have noticed these. This is a lantern, battery operated, which was used, well, of course, at night. The railroad guy would have it to see where he's going when he's walking along the tracks. Also, they used to use these for signals to tell the engineer, move the train or whatever. It had various signals, the swinging it back and forth or up and down. And I don't recall all the motions and what they meant right now, but these were used both for lighting and signaling. And behind it, this is an earlier version of essentially the same thing, except it burns kerosene and has a wick in it, and it's a lantern, also used for lighting and general signaling of the railroad. And of course, the railroads like to keep the property, so they all had heavy-duty padlocks that they would lock up various buildings, etc. with, and of course, had a key that would open it up. By the way, this display case was purchased just specifically for the items of this. A gentleman who at one time was the agent for the Illinois Terminal Railroad here in Chatham. He worked for the railroad his entire life. When he passed away, his widow requested donations be made here in lieu of flowers. And with that money, we were able to purchase this display case for these items. A little tidbit of information. And down at this end are some cans used to oil various mechanisms on the railroad. These are pots, they'd have oil or different liquids in them that they could lubricate or whatever they were doing. Another thing that's interesting, and this is also Illinois Terminal, this platform scale. And remember I mentioned earlier, if you want to ship something on the railroad, you bring it to a depot. Well, they put it on the scale and weigh it. And from that, then they determine how much to charge for your package to wherever it was going. And it actually is on the upright, stamped into the wood, ITRR, Illinois Terminal Railroad. Excuse me. And just various railroad items back in this corner. Up on the wall here are more photographs of Illinois Terminal Railroad cars. Some of them in color. Of course, it's kind of not that common to find old pictures that were in color, but we've got a few in color. There's one coming into Springfield. It was in color. There's crossing, I think that's across Illinois, Lake Springfield, if I remember right. Car in Carlinville, Illinois. Another shot in Carlinville. There's in Girard, and by the way, the station that you can barely see at the corner, that still stands in Girard. And those cars at the top were called streamliners. They had those built after World War II to encourage people to ride the train, because after the war, people started driving their cars more for travel. And of course, airplanes became more common, and passengers on traffic on the railroads started just going downhill, so they tried to increase ridership by buying streamlined trains and offering speedier service, etc. And, well, it finally ended up, it didn't really work. As you know, most people today fly or drive, although Amtrak is quite successful right now. So that, well, I forgot to point this out. I don't know if it shows well or not. The railroad track will have what they call switches, or it'll be a side track. This would be mounted at the mechanism that moved the track for the trains to go, and turn one way would show green for the train to go ahead, and turn it the other way and show yellow, like caution. If you keep going, you're going to end up on the side track. And it burned kerosene, had a container in it. It burned for several days. And of course, that's no longer, the railroads have gotten away from using kerosene lights of all types. So today, they're battery operated or just have reflectors on to reflect the headlights of the engine. Excuse me. So I think that pretty well covers most of the Illinois Terminal items. So with that, I'll quit talking for now, and we'll move on to another topic later.